We're live.
Um, so, Mike, hold on one second. Um, So Damian, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry if this is a little choppy as we go here.
That's all right.
We have a couple of technical issues that we need to dispense with on the UI bill. Some of you may recall that the department wrote us in anticipation of, or I guess in anticipation of some of the changes from, is it the December bill, or are they even potentially anticipating the Biden bill of extension of benefits that they need some authority on? So I'm a little shaky on it. It seems pretty necessary and technical in nature, but I'm going to let Damian explain that he's drafted a couple of amendments to S10, if that is the vehicle, and we could at least, as I get my bearings here, we can at least use that as a starting point for the discussion this morning.
Sure. Yeah. So you were exactly right, Mr. Chair. This does date back to the December extension on some of the CARES Act relief. There were a couple things that happened in that bill. The first was so the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, which is essentially an extension on benefits that's federally subsidized when individuals run out.
Could I interrupt for just 1 second? Because I've neglected to say in that introduction that these are amendments that the administration has asked us to put in the bill.
And I mean, forgive me, but are they on, do we have them on our website, or where, or are we just gonna, you're just gonna talk them through, Damian? Sorry.
I did send them to Nathan this morning because of the last minute change in witnesses. We weren't sure exactly what we were going to cover this morning, so they aren't posted yet, but Nathan has them if the chair would like them posted.
Please.
It's an unedited draft at this point.
Let's post them, and if you can email them to us as well, that would be great.
Sure, I will do that right now. So as I was saying, there are two pieces to this. The first piece is related to the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, which is it's essentially another extended benefits program that provides benefits for individuals when they've run out of unemployment benefits and the regular extended benefits. Oh, I'm sorry. First, we're dealing with
I thought you were dealing with PUA.
No, that was in the tax language that we passed last week. Oh, there are a lot of moving pieces here. So I just sent the language to the committee. And before I get to the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, let me start with extended benefits, because that's the first language here. And I'll share my screen so you can see it. So what we're looking at is section 4 here on the shared screen. What this would do is temporarily suspend certain requirements for triggering an extended benefit period. What extended benefits are is that if there are certain, when you hit a certain point in the official unemployment number, you trigger an extended period of benefits. In our case, it's an extra 13 weeks. So normally, individuals are eligible for up to 26 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. This triggers an additional 13 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. But once you have gone to an off trigger, which we did in the fall because our official unemployment rate dropped below the triggering level, you have to wait a full calendar quarter before you can trigger back on. What this
Sorry,
language,
can you say that one more time? What is
sure.
what pushes you off, or what?
So there are three different measures of official unemployment that will trigger these benefits on. So it's called an on trigger and an off trigger. And the on trigger is basically if your unemployment rate gets above a certain percent, or it's above a certain percent, and it's also above a certain ratio to where the unemployment rate was in previous time periods that are set out in the statute. And I can walk you through that statute. But basically the key is your unemployment rate is elevated. And it's elevated above where it normally is. Then you trigger this extended benefits. In the spring, with the mass of people becoming unemployed, we triggered the extended benefits. In the fall, as our official unemployment rate dropped, we triggered off of the extended benefits, meaning that people were no longer eligible for this additional 13 weeks of benefits. Normally,
Right.
you have to wait a full calendar quarter before you can turn that back on. Even if you dip below for the required amount of time to turn it off, even if it goes right back up, you have to wait a full calendar quarter before you can turn extended benefits back on. What the bill in December allowed us to do is to disregard that waiting period. So you could turn the benefits back on more quickly.
The bill in December being the federal law.
The federal bill, the federal extension of some of the CARES Act provisions.
We can disregard it, but we have to act legislatively to do that disregard.
Exactly. So what they basically said is if you change your state law, you can disregard this requirement here. Is
this all federal dollars, or does it come out of the trust fund?
Extended benefits is a joint federal state program, but I believe I'd have to double check. I believe it is normally it's a 50-50 split. I believe that it is more heavily subsidized under the CARES Act. I don't know if that continues with the extension.
Okay.
I'd have to double check.
Okay.
But this is at the very least 50% federally subsidized.
Okay.
And so what this does is it just basically says during the period from November 1 of last year through December 31st of 2021, the commissioner can disregard that 14-week requirement. So in other words, you can't start until the 14th week following when the extended benefits turned off. You can't restart. So this is almost verbatim with the federal model language. I changed a few things in here just to improve the style and make it a little more succinct, but operationally it does exactly the same thing.
So what beneficiaries under this, if you could give us an example as to when they started their benefits and when the 26 weeks ended, would benefit from this legislative disregard of or a change in the state law, which I guess previously had to follow federal law, which now the federal law is giving us an opportunity to disregard. Who are the beneficiaries that are helped here?
Sure. So this is someone who is long-term unemployed. And so someone who's helped here is someone who became unemployed either at the beginning of the pandemic or was unemployed when the pandemic hit Vermont. And then their benefits ran out. And if you'll remember from testimony in the spring, we were hearing about individuals whose benefits were running out already in March, and they still hadn't been able to find a job, and now businesses were shutting down.
Right.
And So unfortunately, extended benefits didn't trigger on right away for them, but there were other federal benefits programs that came through in the CARES Act. But for those individuals, the extended benefits would have kicked in at some point, and so they would have had this extra 13 weeks of extended benefits. And then in addition to that, there was the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, which entitled them to additional weeks of benefits. And then I believe it was an additional 13 weeks beyond that. So you get this extension of 13 weeks of extended benefits. And then when those ran out, you had pandemic emergency unemployment compensation for an additional 13 weeks. And so for those individuals, they would have been entitled to this extended benefits until we turned off in the fall, when our unemployment rate dipped too low to keep those benefits on. And then they would have had to transition to the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation benefits that were enacted through the CARES Act and were 100% federally funded.
Can you get extended for people who were cut off in the fall from extended benefits, or where our program stopped giving extended benefits? Would this allow them, even if there was a gap, to get back on the extended benefit?
So what this would allow is for the state this doesn't really address the individuals. It addresses the state's ability to turn extended benefits back on for individuals who are running out of regular UI eligibility.
But if they did run out and now they come back and say, can I get extended benefits under this new law, are they going to be out of luck?
Well, so right now, to the best of my knowledge, we are not in a position to trigger back on, because our official unemployment rate, which requires, it looks at individuals who are unemployed and actively seeking work.
Right.
Our official unemployment rate is low, even though we know the real unemployment rate is much higher. And we don't have control over how that's measured. That's a federal measure of unemployment,
right?
Which is not well tailored to the pandemic because of the realities about job search. For many individuals, they can't do a job search because of the social distancing requirements, or they're not being required to because of the social distancing requirements right now. But if we do get to a point where the unemployment rate goes up again, this would allow the department to turn this back on. So when individuals exhaust their unemployment eligibility, they can get extended benefits. That's what this does. So it allows the department to provide additional longer term benefits to individuals when they run out of UI eligibility.
So for the really long-term unemployed, that's who this group is. When you ask for the profile, Michael, that's the profile, is the super long-term extended benefits. And do we know, Damien, the difference? I know our official UI rate is way low. I don't remember what it is at the moment. But do we know what the real UI rate is at the moment here in Vermont because of this job search? Are not requiring a job search under certain circumstances.
This is one of those moments where having my colleagues from the department would be very helpful. I don't know those figures off the top of my head.
Okay, we'll get them.
Yeah, so that if we can get Matt in this morning, he should know those figures. And otherwise, that's something to ask them later. But to the best of my knowledge, we are not at a triggering level right now. But this enables us to trigger back on and off over the coming year as we can, without having to worry about a waiting period, which could.
This is theoretical in some ways. I mean, you could write this to say for the period of March 1st to December 31st, because we're not going to take advantage of this from November to March 1st. We know that already.
Right. Yeah, so this is basically looking back when the feds came out with this language. I think the November 1st language is backwards looking because they're concerned about people whose extended benefits were turning off at that point.
right?
And so that's why we have the backdated language in there. But the reality for us is we're, I think, already at that 14th week. So this is just perspective. If we go above that level again and then drop down and then have another surge that drives us above that level, this would enable the department to turn on the extended benefits quickly without having to wait until a full quarter has passed.
You know, I guess this raises the bigger question. I know there was a lot of concern on the state level and in other states who got trapped in this situation where people had, because of the work search requirement in part, had dropped out of the workforce and therefore our unemployment rate was artificially low and we lost the opportunity to get these extended benefits. Do you have any ideas or thoughts as to how we could get around that? That seems to be a far bigger problem than what we're dealing with here. Because, I mean, this is theoretical. We're still not going to trigger on for artificial reasons. How do we get to trigger on when we know there are all these people out of work that would otherwise allow us to trigger on?
So this is unfortunately one of the difficulties with administering a federally enacted and governed program. The extended benefits program is established in federal law, including all of the trigger provisions. So in order to, we don't have the flexibility really to address that with the triggering on. The only thing that I have seen that other states have done to address this, and to some extent, is to basically have the maximum period of benefits for regular UI fluctuate depending on the level of unemployment in the state. But that, the only state I can think of off the top of my head that has something like that is Massachusetts. And it's a bigger question of how you want to structure your unemployment program in general. But if I remember their program correctly, and it's been a couple months now since I looked at it, when this issue was coming up in the fall, I did some looking at this, and their program, I believe, when they get above certain markers, that period of regular benefits extends from say 26 weeks to 30 weeks. And don't quote me on these numbers, but it's a small extension in the period of regular benefits. And then the period of extended benefits is, I believe, half of the period of regular benefits. So when they're at their maximum, they have a slightly longer period of extended benefits.
So that,
But
I mean, it's getting a little complicated. I don't know who pays for that, but I was more focused on if people are not counted as being in the workforce because they're not searching for work. We've dealt with this work search requirement in terms of trying to balance, not putting people out on the streets looking for work and social distancing and all that. Why couldn't we have people just check off a box and say, I continue to be available for work. I'm willing to make a couple of, contacts, whatever, and then have them counted as being in the workforce, unemployed, and therefore our unemployment rate is more a true picture of what people want and are willing to do. It seems like we're hoisted on our own petard for saying to people, you don't have to do a work search in this climate. And then when they get the questionnaire, they say, I'm not looking for work right now because of COVID.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and I don't know that there is an easy answer to that. I think some of this is a question that's more of an operational question that the department would be better placed to answer. What I can say is that it is traditionally a fundamental requirement of the UI program that you have to be able and available and actively searching for work in order to qualify for benefits. Because of the pandemic, that active work search and the able and available requirement are given some flexibility so that individuals who, because of an underlying health problem or because of a child care or family care issue, are not available for work because of COVID-19, the department has given the flexibility to waive that requirement so they can get UI benefits to them. The problem is the Bureau of Labor Statistics method for counting doesn't take that into account,
Right.
and doesn't have flexibility around that. And then that's what triggers this on and off requirement for extended benefits. But this is where the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation and pandemic unemployment assistance come into play. So those are your next bridges for benefits for individuals who are long-term unemployed and running out of benefits.
Can you do this?
Just,
Can you do this
I
for
just,
us? Excuse me, Allison. Could you do this
Yeah.
for Damien? Can you double back with the department in the next day or so and just say we've had a lot of conversations on some flexibility on what constitutes a work search and how that gets defined if they reinstate that and stuff. Is there anything that they can do here in change of their procedures or rules that could more accurately reflect the unemployment rate? I fear what your explanation is correct, but can you just double check with them if there's, I mean, if it's an operations issue, maybe there's something we can do there, but I just want to make sure we haven't left that stone unturned. So,
Michael, may I just also just give a brief update? I went on the labor's website, and the November, the unemployment rate, the official unemployment rate's about 3.1% or 3.2%. And the commissioner guesstimates that that's only a third of who's currently unemployed in Vermont, that the number is really more like 30,000, 9.3% roughly. So that's a huge difference.
Yep.
In terms of what we're looking at here.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think we've beat this first section pretty well. Can we go on to the next section?
Yeah.
Sure. Let me just.
What, section 4 that was?
Yep. So let me reshare my screen here. Sorry, I took the screen share down because I was opening up my notes for the committee. And it's also nice to see everyone. So let me reshare the screen. And
what page are we going to now?
We're going to stay on the same page, just moving down to section 5.
Okay, page 7. Great.
Page 7 at line 11, starting at line 11. So before I get into this is the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. So if you're thinking about the way the benefits work during the pandemic, your first step in benefits is regular unemployment insurance. Your second step in benefits, if it's available, is extended benefits. Then you go on to pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. And then if you run out of all unemployment eligibility, you can go on to pandemic unemployment assistance. The extension that passed at the federal level in December added an additional 11 weeks of PEUC, pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, to the existing 13. So it runs that through March 14th of this year. One of the things that was included in there was a provision basically saying that if you had someone whose benefit year expired after December 27th, which is the week beginning when the extended PEUC benefits became available, and the benefits that they would receive in their new benefit year are $25 less than what they would have received in the old benefit year through PEUC, you could continue them on the PEUC benefits. So let me back up here and we'll start with what is a benefit year. So benefit year it's the year beginning with the first week of your unemployment insurance claim. So let's say I went on to unemployment last February, the first week of February last year. My benefit year would end the first week of February this year. And within that year, under normal circumstances, I'm entitled to 26 weeks of unemployment benefits. In addition to that, if extended benefits are on, I can get an additional 13 weeks. And then under the PEUC program, I would also be entitled to an additional 13 weeks of benefits. What this extension allowed, so first the PEUC was extended so it could run until March 14th or the week of March 14th, and there were additional weeks of benefits added to allow for that to happen.
I stop you for a second there.
Mm-hmm.
Extension of the PEUC was not additional weeks for the individual claimant. It was just extending the program past December 27th to March 11th. So
it was both.
So we're talking about 26, 13, and another 11 weeks?
That's right.
Okay.
So it basically allowed individuals who were exhausting their PEUC on the last week that benefits were available under the CARES Act to continue receiving it through March 14th.
Okay.
The other piece here, though, was, so what if my benefit year was going to expire in that time period? What this basically says is that if your new benefit year that you would qualify for provides you with $25 or more, or $25 or more reduction in benefits over what you were receiving in the prior year. So let's say I was receiving $200 under my last benefit year, but when they look at my eligible wages now, my benefit would drop down to $100. So I'm receiving $100 less. What this allows the department to do is one of four things, but basically it allows them to use the PEUC benefits and provide that extension under the old benefit year. So it's a very complicated piece. I am not clear on which of the four options the department wanted to select. And I have not heard back from them in my email asking them to confirm. But the option that I believed they wanted based on their email was this option where they could continue providing PEUC benefits and defer the start of the new benefit year for the individual, which basically means they're providing federally funded benefits without tapping into the trust fund and just basically deferring the period where the individual switches over to the new benefits. That seemed to be what the director of UI was asking for.
Is the basic purpose of this is to make some people who otherwise would be ineligible for benefit because of their benefit years eligible for this additional 11 or 14 weeks of benefits?
Yes, rather than having them switch over to a new UI claim.
So, but aren't this 11 or 14, aren't we in this 11 or 14 week period right now? And are these people ineligible now and we're going to give this benefit retroactively to them?
So what this basically provides is it's individuals whose benefit year expires some week of December 27th. And so normally you'd have to do a new benefit claim and calculation looking at the wages that they've earned in the 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters, provided those wages haven't been considered for purposes of UI already. So for a lot of individuals, what they might be doing is counting a partial calendar quarter from the spring before they lost their job, which wasn't counted in their initial unemployment claim because the quarter wasn't completed yet. So this allows us to basically continue those individuals and to keep them from falling off of a sort of benefits cliff here where they're
already.
What's that?
Have they fallen off already?
They might have. So there are there are a couple of different instances when this could come into play. One is that they're continuing to receive benefits and their benefit year would be expiring sometime before March 14th. And this allows the department to just extend that benefit year out and keep them on PEUC. The other thing is if, let's say,
sorry, and you implied that protects the UI trust fund for longer.
Yeah, so PEUC is federally funded.
Well, it's half. I thought you said it was 50-50.
That's extended benefits.
Oh, that's sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. And extended benefits under the CARES Act, if I remember correctly, they bumped up the federal funding level. I don't know if that was extended under the extension. So the PEUC is an additional federal pandemic only 100% federally funded benefit. And this extends it out and it keeps people, this basically does 2 things. It keeps people who are currently receiving it, but whose benefit year is about to run out from being knocked off and being required to requalify for UI. The other thing it does is, let's say I was receiving UI in the fall or through the fall, then I got hired for a temporary position over the holidays, let's say at a ski resort, but now the ski resort is starting to shut down staff as their season winds down and I become unemployed again. And my benefit year has run out. Instead of having to requalify or instead of receiving a significantly diminished benefit because I only earned wages for a couple of months in my base period, now I can extend my previous benefit year and continue receiving this pandemic emergency unemployment compensation until whenever that runs out, which right now is the week of March 14th. So it basically provides benefits for folks based on their base period that they qualified for when the pandemic started or when they first became unemployed. And it extends for right now through March 14th. And what it would do is just defer their new benefit year to whenever the PEUC runs out. And when that runs out, then they transition to the new benefit year. And it's just as if we hit the pause button. So it might help to walk through the language here.
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm sorry. I
don't think so. I have a massive headache.
I know. So may I just ask
and this is only going to get more complicated if the new COVID bill passes, because that's why everybody's talking about March 14th of trying to get it done by then.
Right.
People's benefits are going to run out. But what I want to just be clear about, we're talking about in this section, the possibility of people getting extra PEUC from December 27th until March 14th, but a significant share of the affected population, I would assume, have not been receiving this PEUC since December 27th until today, which is, I don't even know what day it is anymore, but
so it's February 16th. If you take my example from the beginning of someone who became unemployed at the beginning of February last year, they would have just exhausted their old benefit year
Right.
last week. Or someone who became unemployed the week that the governor declared the state of emergency last year would still have benefits in their benefit year. But the way the language is structured in here, it doesn't expire. I've structured it so it doesn't expire on March 14th in anticipation of the federal government potentially extending PEUC again. So to the extent that that happens, this is set up to address that. But again, this is an area where you may want to hear more from the department to talk about whether this is actually what they want, because this is my best guess based on the department's request, but I haven't yet been able to connect with Cameron Wood to confirm that this is actually the proposal the department wants. I've sent them the language, but at this point I haven't been able to hear back. I only had a chance to get the language done yesterday. So
is this 1 through 4, the choices the federal government gives us, but we can only select one, and could we?
Nope.
Okay, sorry.
So the 1 through 4 in subsection A are basically the requirements. You had to have been eligible for PEUC in the prior benefit year. You have to have remaining eligibility. And then you have to be able to qualify for new benefits in your new benefit year. And then your weekly benefit amount for the new benefit year has to be $25 less. So those are the requirements that the federal government gave us. And I boiled them down and put them into this.
Okay.
And then the language in B talks about sort of some of the other mechanics here about deferring the benefit year.
Well, what's you kept saying, I don't know if this is the choice that the administration would take. I thought you at one point said there were.
Sure. If you give me just a second here, I will pull up the unemployment insurance program letter that lays out the options.
Well, just briefly, so when you say options, do you mean we have a choice of which path to follow in implementing this change, and you're not sure which one they would choose? And did you pick one, or are you giving them an option in the statute to pick one of those options?
I chose one of the options based on the phrasing of the email that Cameron sent to the committee requesting this.
Right.
So just to give you the options here, the options are: 1, establish a new benefit year for the individual, but defer payment of regular unemployment until the PEUC has been exhausted. 2 is defer establishment of the new benefit year and put the base period on hold from when the individual would have been able to establish that benefit year until after the PEUC has been exhausted. And that's what I've done here. 3 is establish a new benefit year, commence regular UI payments, and augment them with funds remaining in the claimant's PEUC claim. So the benefits they're eligible under that, to basically bring them up to that full benefit. And then 4, it provides that for an individual who elects not to file a claim for regular unemployment benefits in the new benefit year, the state would determine pandemic PEUC eligibility without regard to the unclaimed regular unemployment and continue to pay on the PEUC claim. So typically you can't qualify for PEUC if you're still eligible for regular UI. So the first 3 options either allow you to establish a new benefit year and either begin it by paying PEUC in lieu of UI or by augmenting UI with PEUC dollars. Option 2, which is the one that I think Cameron was asking for, but I'm not sure, delays the start of the new benefit year and just continues paying PEUC until you exhaust that eligibility. And then option 4 is basically allowing the claimant to opt to elect, if they elect not to file for UI, to determine a new PEUC claim for them. I agree, Mr. Chair. My head hurts too thinking about this.
Man, it's brutal. And if I can understand it in very lay terms, the reason you think Cameron is encouraging us with option 2 is that it helps us take advantage of as many federal dollars as possible to pay these extended benefits through March 14th. And before we have to go back on being dependent on our own UI trust fund dollars.
That is what that's where I think he was going in the email. But again, I would say that my level of certainty was below 50%. So
Okay,
I went with my best guess here. A lot of this language doesn't need to change if the department says actually we wanted option 1 or option 4. And I just need to change the language around sort of the base requirements.
So, so Senator Clarkson, in your 2-sentence explanation, you can now report this section of the bill.
Oh, thanks. As you know, on this committee, I may have anyway, I won't apologize any further for my understanding of this very complicated system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole UI statute is exactly like this.
It is mind numbing.
Yeah.
And I know it's all been crafted for reasons. I do wish it was just, so much simpler and more understandable for just
Mr. Chair, I hope that the next time that this comes up for us to review in committee, you'll notify me in advance so that I can schedule a root canal.
Yeah.
Do we get couples therapy?
Well,
yeah. This is
Michael, we've lost your visual.
Okay, so let's move on. We're gonna leave this wonderful area of these changes and go back to what I want to revisit and try and finish up on is the language that Damien had prepared on the reoffering of work and have a discussion about that. And it looks like Matt Barowitz, I guess, is not joining us this morning. I was hoping we can get into rate relief and benefit questions, but
Did we got a response from Amanda?
no, I haven't gotten any responses at all. Have
Okay,
you?
let me just double check. Yeah, nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Damien, could you pull up, let's see what time it is. We have about a half hour. Could you pull up the language? I think it was about a week ago we were dealing with, and we had some tweaks, or I had some tweaks to it, dealing with the requirement of reoffering employment to people who left voluntarily for personal good cause related to COVID, which we allowed for them to get unemployment benefits last spring. And we we're, I think, all in agreement that we're going to extend the eligibility for those purposes, but there wasn't a requirement in the law last year that there be any connection between the employer and employee about getting back to that job.
okay. So let me see here. Let me share my screen. So this is, I believe, Nathan, I've already sent this to you last week. It was labeled the,
because we should be able to pull it up under you as a witness.
yes, and it was labeled the Sirotkin alternative S10 language with
So
expanded rehire requirement. So, and Nathan may have labeled it more artfully than I do for my purposes of drafts.
You're going to be able to pull it up on the screen as well?
I have it right now, so let me just share it on the screen. And Nathan, if you can't find it, just email me and I'll send you a new copy.
So it's under S. It's not labeled as that. So Nathan's going to have to tell us what it might be labeled.
Okay, let's just move on the screen at this point.
Okay.
Somehow I'm able to see you guys and the screen at the same time. I don't know how I finally did that, but
That's magic.
Yep.
I can only see you. I can only see the one person who's talking.
well, maybe that's all I can see too, but that's good.
There are controls in the tab bar above where you can see the person, where you can change it to a single column or double column. So moving to this language, which I've just put up on the screen, it does a couple of things. So first, if you remember, we gave across the board sort of rate relief for employers for individuals who voluntarily quit for a good cause COVID-19 related reason. And what this language would do is make that language that we enacted last year effective from March 15th of last year through December 31st of last year. So voluntary quits in that period would be forgiven. So it's just non-chargeable, which reflects what the department is currently doing anyway for those good cause voluntary quits. The reason we're doing that, if I bring you down to the amendments I've made to the rate relief for calendar year 2021. So this changes what the committee had originally discussed, and it provides that for calendar year 2021, an employer would be relieved from charges against its UI experience rating for benefits paid because the individual voluntarily separated from employment for one of the reasons set forth in 21 VSA 1344. And I won't go into all the subsections, but those are the good cause COVID-19 related reasons for a quit. And in order to qualify for that forgiveness, the employer would have to rehire or offer to rehire the employee within a reasonable time, not to exceed 30 days after the reason for the individual's separation from employment no longer exists, or the employer demonstrates to the commissioner that it had good cause for failing to rehire or offer to rehire the employee. So it takes those same requirements, that rehire requirements or offer to rehire requirements that we have discussed for the employer layoffs, where the employers shut down a location or furloughed their staff, and applies it to the good cause quits once the reason for the separation no longer exists. So for example, if someone left employment because their school or childcare closed, the employer would have to rehire or offer to rehire them within 30 days after that situation no longer exists, unless it had good cause for failing to do so, such as, they closed down one of their restaurant locations and they're not going to reopen it because they've had to downsize their business due to the financial strain from COVID-19. In which case, if they did have that good cause, they would also be forgiven for or not charged for those unemployment benefits. Does that make sense to everyone? I know we've covered a lot this morning, so I imagine
It makes sense. It's really unfortunate that the department's not here. I mean, the outstanding question I remember asking Cameron, I said, without drawing a position on whether you approve of this idea of trying to incentivize a rehiring. It's not requiring a rehiring. It's just saying if you want the rate relief, you've got to offer the job back unless there's a reason that you can't. Sort of gives priority status to that old employee. I said, tell us operationally how you would do it if we passed the law. And that's what I think I'm wondering. I mean, as you recall, they really asked us to effectively change the law from last year in terms of the offer of rehire and the mass separations. And we've agreed to do that to accommodate them for 2020. That's when they said they needed it, because that's the year they're looking back at right now, and they have these 100,000 claims. But going forward for calendar year 2021, they said that difficulty won't exist. And so they can ask on an individual basis, presume that there's chargeability, and go on an individual basis and determine whether they should relieve chargeability in those cases. So I said, can we extend that to the voluntary quits as well? That's what this proposes to do. And we specifically asked Cameron, come back and tell us why you can't do that. So that's where we sort of are at this point without an answer, because we don't have the witnesses today. But we will get that answer. Anything more on that? I think the
Mr. Chair.
language, yes.
There's also an underlying question in which from time to time, we hear from employers who say that we are unable to hire people back that we want to, because they won't come back because of the generosity, if you will, of unemployment benefits. Now, whether that's true or not, the question is, does the department, and we've asked this before, and I have been unclear about the answer, do we have any means of determining whether or not this is in fact an issue? I'm not sure whether any of you have heard this from employers as I have.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely have heard it.
That's definitely.
But I'm not sure it's applicable here, because all the employer has to do is, in this case, is say that they offered the job back. And if the person doesn't take it, then they don't have to, they wouldn't be chargeable at that point, or they would continue to be non-chargeable at that point. So
Well, if it were as easy as that, I would expect that we wouldn't be hearing the number of complaints that we are. Just wondering if there's another layer here that we're missing.
Let me, maybe
these complaints.
Damien can explain it. What I'm trying to say is that what you're talking about, I think, more is work search and able and available to work. Here, we're talking about somebody who is receiving benefits or got benefits because they left because they contracted COVID or had to deal with childcare. And the question is, should the employer be charged in terms of their experience rating? And the approach in the language before you is to say they have to, in order to continue with that non-chargeability, they have to show that they offered the job back when the person became available to work. If the person chooses not to take that job, which is, I think, the issue you're talking about, then the employer wouldn't have their experience rating negatively impacted. You want to rephrase that, Damien?
So yeah, the basic requirement here is it would be that if the employer could show that it had offered or rehired the individual or was unable to do so for some other good cause, they would have their experience rating relieved from those charges in 2021. The one piece here that I think the committee, assuming that there isn't some there aren't other complicating reasons from the department that come forward as to why this may not be feasible, is some way of basically requiring that the individuals give notice to their former employer that they're available for work. That could be done basically through the work search requirement or something like that, to send a notice to their employer. And then when the employer receives that notice, make the clock start then, because the issue I could potentially see here is that an employer says, well, they were apparently available for work, but I never knew. So how was I going to offer to rehire them? I thought they were still home because they didn't have childcare. But I think that the functional piece here is that they have to make that offer or actually rehire or show that they couldn't. The pieces and the reality as to how difficult this might be to administer from the departments or businesses or a claimant side, that I can't really speak to, but those are probably, the three things to consider are how do claimants let their employer know, or how does the employer know that they need to do this, and when they need to do it? How do claimants know that they need to reach out? And I think this committee has talked to the department previously about providing notice that their first job contact should be to their former employer or something like that. And then, is this something that the department can actually administer on the scale that we're talking about here? I know that they've indicated that they think they can administer the first sort of rehire and offer to rehire requirement where the employer did a layoff. But that one's a little different because that's the employer's reason. So the employer knows that those jobs are available again because they've relocated or reopened their location. And this one here, it's the trick is getting the individual to tell the employer that they're available. But I think that there was some discussion about doing that in the once the work search requirement is reinstated, and that individual is, says, well, I don't have to be home for childcare anymore. And, they send that initial contact to their former employer and say, I'm ready to come back to work if you have a job available. And then.
Thank you for that. I think that's a good explanation. I've
Agree.
I've simplified this to the extent it can be simplified in my own mind by a diagram of 4 boxes. Across the top, it's a square, 4 quadrants. Across the top is 2020, 2021. Along the left-hand side is mass layoff, and the next box is voluntary quit. We have agreed that for all of 2020, because of administrative difficulties, we're going to relieve the experience rating of all employers, whether it be for mass layoffs or for voluntary quits. For 2021, the department has said that for mass layoffs, they can administer on an individual claimant and employer basis the experience rating by the default position being that they will be charged. And then if the employer could make a case as to why they shouldn't be, they could administer that. We're dealing with that little box in the lower right-hand corner for 2021, where someone left their employment for good reason due to COVID for voluntary reasons, and whether we can impose a requirement vis-a-vis chargeability to at least offer the job back to the person who had to quit for COVID related, that they would have a priority for that job. And again, we're waiting for administrative complications that the department may have. I think, again, going back to the whole thing with the 73% of women, and we've sort of said that it seems like childcare may have a lot to do with that, trying to get people back to work here by at least making an offer to that worker who had to leave for that reason. We do it in our workers' comp business for small employers. A workers' comp program, we give the first offer to the person who has been laid off because or had to leave. We were doing it in our ill-fated paid family leave last year. It's not a mandate that you give them the job back. It's just that you at least talk to them about whether they want to come back or not. So we're just going to have to wait on this until we hear from the department. Are there any other questions on that? If not, Damien, is there anything else? I'm sorry, I can't see you, Allison. I see everybody else.
Oh, I'm right there in
there
bright
you are.
red.
Okay.
So I guess I'd just like to ask a clarifying question. So what we're also thinking of adding is that a worker would need to inform their former employer or their employer that they were available and ready to work. That we would add not just the burden on the employer to let the employee know that they now are in a position to hire more people.
That's totally reasonable. Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. That's where
Okay.
I was asking, what
Right,
is the
so-
operational way to do this from?
Right,
county?
and so that's our question to the department is, are they capable of enabling that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Thank
the,
you.
Yep.
Sorry, I just needed to clarify that. Yeah,
Okay, thank you for that question. Damien, are there other outstanding things? I mean, I think the language, I should say that we don't need to dwell on it now, but the language I think that you pulled up is not the last version I saw. We wanted to make sure that in this context that if there was a reason for the department to investigate a claim of lack of rehiring, that they would do so. But this seems to be an earlier version of it, but I don't think we need to get into that right now. We need to hear from the department.
yeah, I should have made that clear. So I've kept this alternative rehire provision in there. It's just two different documents. So the language around the department investigating, you'll find that in the document, the draft that I shared with you this morning that had the additional pandemic unemployment language in it. And then this additional rehire requirement could just be dropped into that draft. So it's just my drafting process. I've had two parallel drafts and haven't been updating them both. But
it's just it's not a big deal. It's just a way to make sure a good cause is established. That's all. So we are at the end. We're gonna at the end of the week. We get a lot of requests as chair for groups that want to come in, and it's really hard to accommodate everybody when you're trying to get bills out. So I did give the housing and conservation groups 50 minutes, and I think I'm going to have to shorten that in light of the lost time we had today. And I offered them to come in this morning, but they couldn't get any of their witnesses in this morning. So there may be a slight adjustment in the schedule on Friday. So I guess I'm going to end there and give people a little extra time. We are proceeding with the relocated worker bill, the project-based TIFs, the code enforcement and registry. And I've been working this morning on a fourth significant bill, which deals with bylaws and density in a more incentive-based direction than the bill of 237 last year. But I always maintain that last year's bill was incentive-based also. But this is more in terms of potential one-time money and grants to get people to update their bylaws to provide for smarter zoning and subdivisions. And that bill should be finalized for introduction, I'd say, by the end of the week. There's going to be a question that we're going to have to face with that bill and the project if we want to combine some of these. They all deal with smarter growth in downtowns and neighborhoods. And there's a lot of things in the governor's proposal for one-time monies and otherwise in the budget. So if we're going to write a letter or do it by statute, brownfields and downtown tax credits, home improvement housing credits, they're all part of that picture. So we're going to have to decide whether we want to just write a letter or we want to pass statute
Right.
in that regard as well.
Yeah, those are our critical downtown toolbox, you
Exactly.
know.
So we have about five significant pieces of legislation that are percolating along. I'll ask the pro tem, I see her there. Can you give us any preview on crossover guidelines?
We'll be discussing that in chairs this afternoon,
Okay.
so we should know by the end of the week.
Right. And there are other bills that sadly still aren't out yet. I have a bill I'd love to have us look at, and it may be a crossover bill, but it's one that addresses the asset gap for marginalized communities and enhances our down payment assistance program, really trying to get at building assets for a population of people who have significantly lower assets than their counterparts here in Vermont. And that bill should be ready for introduction very shortly. I'm just waiting to finish that work with Maura Collins. And the student debt bill, which you may have heard is continues. There was a good piece on NPR this morning about the impact of student debt and the ballooning debt during COVID. This is a big concern for me. But the ballooning debt, as more people put stuff on credit cards, and we've seen it with rent. We've seen it, and they're affecting their ability to get rental assistance because by mistake they put their rent on it. Anyway, I'd love to brainstorm in this committee what we could do to address as we come out of the pandemic, this ballooning credit card debt that I believe is an issue that, and I don't know, I mean, sadly, David, I mean, all the research I've done on it indicates that most of it's federal. Is there a piece of it that we could address as a state? Those are the things that are coming up and about to hit our committee, I hope. The student debt bill and the down payment assistance one.
I don't know how things are going to work with crossover, and there are always ways to, continue to keep things alive somehow. I know one bill that's not as urgent for me. I mean, you'll notice a pattern in the bills we're dealing with. They're pretty much leftover bills from last year that at least the committee has some familiarity with, and we're trying to tie the knot and bring them to closure. They're all, I think, fairly important issues. A lot of them are COVID related, certainly economy related. I still have a penchant for something with online sports betting. I think we're throwing away money there that we could easily capture. But
well, that's an issue.
It's not the highest, even though we did take some testimony, it's not the highest priority compared to these other bills. I would say we had a presentation. I don't know if Senator Brock shares, if he was there. I think he was. We had a presentation in finance on that. It was really a good presentation, very thorough by Gary Kessler. I think it made the case really strongly for doing this. But anyhow, so I'll just say that given that we just had a little extra time here. So with that, we'll see you all on the in committee at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Thanks. And Mr. Chair, when
looking forward.
When we have ACCD in on Thursday, do you mind if I ask about the March 1st guidance that people were expecting in the gatherings and events, economic communities?
No.
Okay.
No problem.
And I have not gotten an email back about that. The email I included you in on, Acacia, about that. The only
yes,
email
I saw your email and that you didn't get a response, right?
No, nothing. Okay. And I got a reinforcement of the need from Karen Middleman, who, as you know, is the director of the Vermont Arts Council, that only reinforces this for us to address. The as Becca calls it, the gathering sector, the gathering business sector.
I would hope
special events.
Well, what I'm trying to do, I mean, obviously questions like that are appropriate. But what I'm trying to do is set aside 90 minutes for the next 3 weeks or more. Actually, we have much more because it's not subject to crossover really. It's more a budget issue, is to deal with their budget mostly in ACCD. And this week, I think there are, Senator Clarkson, you can remind, there are 3 programs I wanted to get into: brownfields,
Yep.
Bob's sustainability, and there was one other.
Oh, I have to look at their,
It's on the schedule. So I
oh,
picked,
the stimulus, wasn't it stimulus?
I think it was more the tourism idea of
Right,
taking excess revenue for putting into their marketing program. So, but it's on the calendar. So I picked 3 for this week, and we'll, go a little deeper into those 3 programs. But we'll do that every Thursday morning from 8:30 to 10 o'clock. So that's where we are. It's 11:30. So
thank you, Chair. And there was actually, despite the need for VDOL, we got lots discussed, and I hope some clarified. It's beginning to distill in my mind anyway.
well, I think the first hour where we spent as Senator Brock labeled it as root canal, I think if we were more pressed for time, we wouldn't have had the ability to go into that much depth, and we would have probably thrown our hands up a lot sooner. So anyhow, that's where we
I
are.
found it tremendously enjoyable.
I love your sarcasm. Okay, let's go.
Great.
Tomorrow.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.